welcome to all our speakers today. I think there's a lot of content to dig into, so we'll get straight to it. So I want to start with the big picture. So Dr. Sun, turning first to you, was curious if you could help us paint a picture of how the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine and all of the sanctions imposed against Russia are impacting global energy markets, and in particular, which commodities are being most affected, and also how long do you expect some of the fluctuation in global energy prices to continue for until we sort of see some degree of stabilization?
Yeah, thank you very much. You invite me to join you for this discussion, and I just talk some of my comments about this issue personally, and I wish this can be further discussed and for your reference. And as we know that the Russian-Ukraine issue happens today is 99 days. And this issue probably in the world now, I think two major issues affect all the nations and the government and the people. One is the COVID-19. Yeah, this is in the past almost 3 years, and happens so many people infected, and the countries and also and the economy affected. And the second one is Russian-Ukraine issue. And this one today is 99 days. So about 3 months, about 100 days. So I feel that this is a very important and the serious issue happens. This especially after the EU and American sanction to the Russian for the complete all these the sanctions, and I feel that the effect is huge, especially the sanctions on the energy is more directly related with us because we all more involved into the energy studies, and I feel that as we know that in the world so far we have 4 major oil producers. And these players are more important. Mainly, these the Saudi, United States, and Russia. These 3 countries every day produce more than 10 million barrels. So usually in the industries we call these the countries we call the 10 million barrels producers. Yeah. So these are 3, and plus 1 that is the 10 million barrels importer or consumer. That is China. So we usually talk about the 4 million barrels countries. Yeah, so that's, and I feel that these 4 million barrels, the countries are the major important player and have more impacts for the global market and also for the production and the consumptions. And for this one, this time after this the Russian Ukraine conflict, and we can see that this after the sanction and the Europe have the rely on the import is about 97% of the crude, is about 83% of gas, and about the 35% or 36% of this coal by the import, and also by the Europe from the Russia itself is. The import is about for the coal is about 47%, and for gas 41%, and oil is about 27%. So we can see that the sanction on the Russian have a big impact, and we see that yesterday the day before yesterday the EU make the announcement that the further sanction on the Russia about the sea shipping trade for the crude itself. Of course, for the pipeline and other, not yet. And we know that the Russians' production for oil is more than 10 million barrels. And also for the last 2-3 months, export even more. Yeah. So by the IEA and the studies that probably after sanction, about 4 million barrels from Russia will be affected. However, by statistics yesterday I saw that now, by the last month, only 1 million barrels reduced from Russia, and I think this is by the market itself. So far, no any countries can replace Russia by this production. Yeah. So if each day reduce 1 million barrels, is a big number. Yeah. And if, as the some of the think tanks the focus, if more than 3-4 million barrels reduced from the market, I feel that the oil prices will fly. Now, even now we can see that oil prices come to the July, the future is about $120 already. Yeah. So if further reduce, and then I feel that is a disaster for the big importers like China, India, even Japan and Korea. All these the big importers. So I think is a big impact for this the oil market. And also about this the import and China and from the Russia is only take about 12%. And China for the crude is about 15 countries, import from 15 countries. And for the gas, LNG is about 16 countries. And from Australia is the number one, the LNG, the country to export to China. So is a big. And so that's the general the situation. I understand, and I feel that this the after the sanction, the impact to the importers, even to the Asian countries, is big. And also because the major market for the Russia originally is Europe. Now the Europe largely reduced the volume, so they will try to develop its new market from the other countries, from other regions, especially the Asian, because Asia more closer to the Russian. So I feel that in the future, in the near future, few months, we can see that the market will be more competitions because the Russian, they give a big discount, and it's about 30% discount for this, and no reason for the buyers to refuse such a cheaper the crude compared with the Brent. Brent is high prices. For example, India import about 3 times the more than before from the Russia of this crude because too much discount. It's about 1/3. This more than 30% discount. So it's really attractive. So that's the situation. And I know that you like to ask me now how we see that the Russian the Ukraine the conflict maybe can be completed. So I personally believe that maybe 2 conditions, preconditions. One, of course, I would wish the war or conflict can be completely or terminated as soon as possible. We don't like the wars, but however, and I feel that this time this happens and cannot be very fast because Russian they expect to have a acceptable or honorable results, and then they will stop. So because they started already. So I feel that, and some of the specialists also have this kind of the comment. So this is the one, and also this depends on the support from the other country to the Ukraine government. And the Ukraine without the strong support for finance and for military and heavy equipment, and we don't think they can Ukraine they can support continue this for a long time. So that's the general the comment for this issue. And I just stop here and join you for the discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sun. I think that was a super helpful picture, a lot of high-level statistics to help lay the groundwork for some of the rest of the discussion. I think that's a good segue for the next question, which I want to turn to Erica to ask, which is sort of going back a few months to the outset of the Beijing Winter Olympics. You had China and Russia sort of reinvigorate their bilateral relationship, this sort of no limits partnership between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And I think Dr. Sun alluded to this a little bit, but basically in light of that, are we seeing China increase their purchasing of Russia commodities and energy following the global sanctions from the war, and is China paying less for Russian energy in light of this? I think just sort of tangential to that, how is this impacting how China is approaching energy security more generally from a domestic perspective.
Sure. So I'd like to make a few points about the China-Russia energy relationship. And I'll start by answering your first question. And the answer is yes, Chinese purchases of Russian crude oil, natural gas, and coal are increasing. At the end of last month, China released its customs data for April. So April is the most recent month for which we have data. And in April of this year, China's purchases of Russian oil, natural gas, and coal were higher than they were in March 2022, and also higher than they were in April 2021, with bigger percentage increases for liquefied natural gas and coal than for oil, although I think that's something that's going to change as we go forward, and I'll touch on that momentarily. The second point I want to make, again, to answer one of your questions, is that the primary impetus for these increased purchases of Russian energy appears to be the attractive prices at which they're being offered. I think Dr. Sun did a great job of explaining the details of this with respect to crude oil. And the only thing I would add to his explanation is that when we look at Russian oil flowing to China, there are really two categories of Chinese buyers of Russian oil. One are the big national oil companies, PetroChina, Sinopec, China National Offshore Oil Corporation. And the second group are independent refineries, which are located in Northeast China. They're concentrated in Shandong province. And these refineries typically operate on very thin margins. They're highly opportunistic crude buyers. They especially like Russia's ESPO blend crude. And so the opportunity to be able to snap up Russian crudes at a discount is going to be especially appealing to these independent refineries. The third point that I would like to make is that going forward, I think China probably has a greater capacity to take in additional cargoes of Russian oil as opposed to coal or natural gas. And that just has to do to the fact that China's oil trade with Russia isn't subject to the same infrastructure constraints that its coal and natural gas trade is. And I should mention that with coal and with natural gas, the logistical constraints are primarily on the Russian side, and basically, most of Russia's export infrastructure, both for coal and for natural gas pipelines, that flows to Europe and not to China. So there are real capacity constraints. And this brings me to the fourth point that I would like to make, and this has to do with sort of, I guess, the even bigger question of to what extent can, China soak up all of the additional cargoes of energy that buyers in Europe and elsewhere are shunning. Again, as Dr. Sun mentioned, Russia is looking to, increasingly reorient its trade to Asia. And while I think there is still some room for Asia, Russia energy trade to grow, there isn't any way that China can absorb, all of the sort of quote unquote excess, barrels of Russian oil or cargoes of coal or natural gas. And that just has to do, with just the very large amount of energy that Russia has been selling to Europe. And, I'll just close with one example. If we look at pipeline natural gas, in 2020, Russia exported 175 billion cubic meters of pipeline gas to Europe. And if we look at the China-Russia gas infrastructure right now, there's just one pipeline that delivers natural gas from Russia to China. That's the Power of Siberia pipeline. It has a design capacity of 38 BCM, so much smaller than 174 BCM, and it's not operating at full capacity. And also, it's important to note that right now, the fields, natural gas fields in Russia that supply gas to Europe are not connected to the natural gas field that supplies gas to China. So, there's really no way, at least with respect to natural gas, for China to absorb all that gas that European Union says that it wants to gradually stop importing from Russia. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Also very comprehensive, and I think particularly helpful from understanding the constraints on the infrastructure side to all of the potential trade relationships and these different fuels. So going to Jorrit now, want to emphasize this idea that even though there's an increased focus on energy security currently in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is not necessarily a new issue for China. Energy security was heavily emphasized in the 14th Five-Year Plan in March 2021. And then following that, later that year, last year, there were significant power shortages affecting a number of cities across China. So curious if you can help to explain some of the central drivers of China's energy policy more generally, and how China's policies attempt to strike a balance between the use of fossil fuels, particularly coal, and renewable energy. And I know you also have done some research in terms of how China's taken action from a policy perspective, infrastructure perspective, to confront some of these energy security concerns. So would be curious to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, thanks. So first, on the central policy drivers, you mentioned energy security. I would name a few others, and you can sort of say that these different topics have gotten different prioritization in past years. One important driver has always been sort of the modernization of the energy system, which has included or has included to mean a more efficient system, so a more energy efficient system, getting more services out of the same energy inputs. Also more efficient in terms of cost, so meaning towards a more market-oriented energy system. Other key driver has been sort of the guarantee of supply, meaning in recognition of the fact that energy demand it keeps increasing, how are we going to ensure that that demand can be met? And of course, the decarbonization and reduction of other emissions has been a very important and growing priority over past years and for some time already. Energy security, meaning the dependence on foreign energy imports, has always been important. It's always been a sort of a top-level indicator in their energy plans. But you can sort of say that over the past year or two, these different priorities have shifted a bit. It used to be, you can sort of see in the work plans that they have for energy, which ones are mentioned first, tend to be the ones that are most important. And the modernization and decarbonization were definitely highest ranked for some years. Whereas right now, we really see that energy security has gotten top billing. That's quite strongly related to those things that you mentioned. So the power crunches which were mostly in central and southern China, they had to do a little bit with emission reduction goals, but mostly because of the increases in coal prices in the international market, whereas electricity prices can only move within a certain band. So it became too expensive for operators of coal-fired power plants to produce electricity, really. But these two crises, or also the global energy price crisis, these two crises have really made that top leadership in Beijing really feels the need to address this very quickly and strongly. So what we've really seen in the language that they've used, for example, in this power crunch, is that they've been talking about coal is still a very central pillar, and everyone knew that, but they are very closely tying that to those power crunches. So sort of emphasizing that coal-fired power generation is the most secure way to supply electricity. And with this international market crisis, we've seen that the response has been immediately to open up, for example, roughly 300 megatons of coal mining capacity. 300 megatons is roughly also the same amount as they would import in a usual year. So it's sort of calibrated to that amount. And like you said, this sort of infrastructure, it's from a study that we've done recently, where one of the ways that China ensures energy security is by using more of its own energy, and especially more of its own coal, is what we research at least. So getting its coal from its own coal mines to its power plants and steel plants. And the way that they do that is mostly by rail, and they've been expanding capacity of rail for many years already, but it's been difficult to keep up with demand, really. And just last year, one of the bigger projects that came online is the Haoji rail line. It's about a 200 megaton rail line going from Mongolia, so a key coal mining region, straight south to exactly that sort of region where the power crunch was the most severe over the last year. Meaning that they can now much more easily and much more cheaply supply coal exactly to those regions. And our study really showed that this energy security policy is also very much going to sort of decouple China from international coal markets. So they're going to buy a whole lot less coal from the international market. And we think that that was always the plan. We think that policymakers in Beijing have long been quite irritated with having to import this much coal. And probably the combination of this sort of energy security and decarbonization plans will mean that the imports of coal will come down really quite very quickly over the next couple of years. Maybe just to close, like, what is the balance between coal and renewables? I've talked mostly about coal, but definitely the push for renewables is as strong as it ever has been in China. Just yesterday, they released their newest plan for renewable energy, and they're planning about 100 gigawatts of solar and wind additional capacity over the next 5 years. So definitely, and renewable energy is also a very secure way to produce energy. So there definitely is a bit of a top leadership is definitely sort of pivoting back a little bit towards coal on the basis of energy security, but the push for decarbonization is still very much on.
Thanks, Jorrit. No, that was super comprehensive as well. And I think also a good segue to taking a step back and sort of looking at decarbonization policy more broadly in China. So going back to you, Dr. Sun, would be helpful to hear a little bit more background. So back in September 2020, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the Shuang-10 goals to peak carbon emissions by 2030 and then also achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So I was wondering if you could help to summarize some of the key policies and particularly from an energy perspective in terms of implementing these targets. And then also just how is China's trajectory in terms of achieving these targets playing out in practice, both in the short term in the midst of all these different challenges that we've just discussed, and also the mid to long term sort of being two different pieces of that. I think you're still on mute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. The newest, the 14th 5 years of plan for the energy, especially the renewables, announced yesterday. And of course, these are the joint efforts from the top to the bottom, the companies, the cities, and then come back to the top the government, and then after this the review several rounds, and then come to make it is the publish. So I feel that is the announcement to see that the central government is so serious about this the energy transition and also climate change. It's a kind of the action for the Paris Agreement, and also the action to follow the COP26 from the Glasgow. Yeah, so we can see that this is a very aggressive, and also we can see that the specific target. Yeah, so just that by this announcement that in 5 years another 100 gigawatts of the renewables will put into lines. Yeah, so put into service. So I can see that this is the serious announcement. All the actions. So by this one, also by 2020, so is about the 9.34 gigawatts of this already coming to the power electricity. And then now for the electricity, the facility, the capacity itself take about 42.5% already. Yeah. So for the wind, for the solar PV, for the hydro, for the geothermal, for the all this, and China is already number one. Yeah. So is globally China needs to make the big effort already to make achievements. So for the utilization of this, for the hydro, for the wind, for the solar PV, and by this one is about last year is 97%, and 98%. So by this in the past years, the power produced, but not really put into lines, use some of waste. Yeah. So but by the last year, this make a big progress. So this is one of the achievements, and also by this one from the 14th five-year plan, we can see that China, the government make a big effort to reduce the use of the coal. And so the major issue is the emission of CO2 and how to control the emission of CO2. One of the major issue is to reduce the consumption of coal and also improve the efficiency of the coal. So all the power plants in China all upgraded already. All the power plants, by the coal power plants, all upgraded, and also they use the CCUS. CCUS new technology already studied for this the factories for this, and although maybe still not good enough, but the efforts they start already for this. So by this we can see that this is the big progress, and also for the storage. Energy storage also is one of the major efforts in the future. By this the five-year plan, we can see that, and also they put the hydrogen. Hydrogen is one of these future target for the Chinese government. So, however, for the future for the energy and is as important as the grain in China. Because China is a big population country. For the energy and the grain are two major the resources, and I feel that China's government in the future 5 years will make further efforts for the domestic production. So as you know that China the big the consumer and also big the producer, and China the crude also each day produce about 4 million barrels, and also the gas a big producer. Worldwide, number 4 or 5 numbers in the worldwide for countries. So they continue for this. Of course, under the clean use of coal, and also for in the total volume, the coal will be every year reduce about 1 to 1.5% by this. And the future years even the agree higher than this. So and also the second efforts in the future 5 years is about they improve the efficiency. The energy efficiency is the number one energy. So it's in the policy of Chinese government. So how to improve efficiency use of energy? This is number one important. And also plus the technology for CCUS to control the emission of CO2. And the number 3 is about further how to improve the ratio of the renewables, including the solar PV for the wind and also offshore wind. Yeah, China also start the offshore wind now, and the hydro, nuclear, and the hydrogen, and geothermal. These are the new renewables. And also Chinese government from the 14 years of plan, we can see that they still like to continue the international cooperations with the other countries, with the Europe countries, with the advanced countries, with the IOCs, and the other IOCs. And another important the policy for China is not put the egg in one basket. Yeah, I just mentioned that. For China, the international trade is one important issue. From the policy itself, we can see that for the crude, China imports from more than 15 countries. Yeah, and Russia is only one of them. Yeah, and the Middle East countries, African countries, and even from the American. Last year, the China's import from the United States is double. Yeah, and for the LNG also. Yeah, so by this, and we support the China import more from North America. Yeah, from the United States, from Canada. But Canada now a little bit difficult. Yeah, because some technical issues there. So, but anyway, yeah, we feel that not put the eggs in one basket. And also for gas, yeah, from 16 countries, LNG and others. So if, of course, the temporary for some reason, with some more discount to the crude or the LNGs, and I think the no reason to refuse this. Yeah, and for Asian countries, including the China, the India, and others, because too much cheaper. So buyers like the good price. So I personally understand this. Yeah. So that's the general situation in China. And if you have any questions, maybe you can discuss later. I stop here. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think some really interesting topics brought up that I'd love to return to. I want to keep going now for time's sake, but particularly the role of CCUS and some of these other technologies you mentioned on the energy storage side, hydrogen side. Obviously, those are going to be key drivers in terms of integrating more flexible power or decarbonization. So would definitely be curious to turn back to that if we have time. But I do want to turn now back to Erica, going back to some of the barriers in practice to China's decarbonization, and particularly in terms of the 5-year plan. So we had the 5-year plan for March 2021, and then more recently, the 14th 5-year plan this year in March for a modern energy system, and then a number of different sectoral plans in addition to that. And all these directives, we mentioned also the brand new plan of renewable energy as well. But in practice, what are the political barriers to curbing the influence of the dominance of fossil fuels in China, particularly in terms of state-owned enterprises? And is there pushback from China's fossil fuel sector more broadly in terms of achieving this energy transition?
So I think that China's fossil fuel companies probably would prefer to continue to live in a world where fossil fuels dominate the energy mix. And I think when it comes to the energy transition, these companies want to make sure that it occurs at a slow enough pace that they can find ways to survive and perhaps even thrive in a lower carbon world. And I should also note that these companies, if we look at the big coal, oil, and natural gas company, these industries employ millions of people. And so I think that is one of the reasons that they have a say on policy issues. I think it's a combination of the large number of people that are employed, both just the tremendous amount of expertise that resides in-house in these companies. Now, that being said, I do want to point out that in September 2020, when President Xi Jinping announced the goals of peaking carbon emissions before 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality by 2060, that these targets have broadened the mandate of China's central state-owned energy companies. And here I'm going to focus on the national oil companies because these are the energy companies in China that I know best. And so if we look at these companies, ensuring or helping to ensure China's oil and gas supply security currently is job number one. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. However, Xi's announcement of the 30-60 targets has broadened their mandate. So they also have to think about and demonstrate that they are doing things to help China decarbonize, both by decarbonizing their own operations and by helping other actors in China reduce their carbon footprint. And here I'm thinking about motorists, for example, who need to refuel their vehicles. And that's something I'll get to in a moment. And so what we've seen is that soon after, after President Xi announced the 30-60 targets, we did see China's national oil companies come out and announce their own carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets. Although I will note that PetroChina actually announced its mid-century net zero target about a month before President Xi announced the targets for China. And the NOCs aren't alone in this, that if you look at other big central SOEs in China, if you look at some of the power sector companies, if you look at, Baowu Steel, there are other companies out there that also have been setting carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets. But getting back to the oil companies for a second, so they've set these targets, and they're also in the process of starting to develop strategies for reducing or limiting the growth of their greenhouse gas emissions. All three companies are doing some of the same things. So they're all, sort of disclosing more and more information about their greenhouse gas emissions. They all disclose annual CO2 emissions. 2 years ago, Sinopec started disclosing methane emissions. Last year, PetroChina started disclosing methane emissions. They're also looking for they're starting to use, more wind and solar at their facilities. All three companies have spoken about increasing the role of natural gas in their production mix as a strategy, because to the extent that natural gas can substitute for coal, that can help lower China's greenhouse gas emissions. But then all three companies also are starting to sort of sketch out their own sort of distinctive strategies. So with China National Offshore Oil Corporation, for example, has been venturing into offshore wind, sort of trying to take advantage of the fact that they've been operating in China's offshore waters for decades. If we look at Sinopec Corporation, for example, they aspire to be China's leading hydrogen energy corporation, and they want to leverage their network of more than 30,000 service stations in China to become a place where motorists don't just show up to, get more gasoline or diesel, but, is this a place where they can refuel hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or do battery swaps or have LNG as a fuel? And then if we look at PetroChina, also has a very large service station network in China, also interested in being a multi-fuel source, and PetroChina and its parent company, CNPC, have also been doing a lot with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, especially within the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. So all of this is to say that companies in China's fossil fuel industries are thinking about how to adapt to a lower carbon future, and even looking to find ways in which they can, capitalize on, current, advantages to, find ways to, ideally profit from a shift to a lower carbon future. And I'll stop there.
Thanks for that. And I think some really interesting examples there of how policymaking not only is top down in nature, but also sort of creates this environment where there is room for innovation from a corporate perspective. And we don't have time to get into it now, but also a subnational perspective as well, as all these different jurisdictions are drawing up their own plans for decarbonization and energy transformation. So really interesting examples there. I want to turn finally to Jorrit before we sort of wrap up afterwards and bring it out to the broader international picture and ask, is China's decarbonization and its movement toward net zero something that's primarily a domestic objective, or how much room is there for international collaboration? I think Dr. Sun alluded to this a little bit in some of his remarks, and I think particularly with you being based in Australia, obviously there's strong trade linkages, especially in the steel industry, between Australia and China and other areas as well. So curious to finish out with a bit of the international perspective.
Yeah, sure. There is definitely room and probably a need for an increased collaboration, global collaboration, because of these decarbonization policies. You can really say that the only area where international collaboration will get reduced because of decarbonization is in the exports of fossil fuels. In many other areas, there will be a need for increase in international collaboration. For example, in clean tech industries. So when we're thinking about PV panels, electric vehicles, but also Dr. Sun mentioned hydrogen. You need a piece of equipment that's called a hydrolyzer. China is very likely to become the world's biggest producer and supplier of those machines as well. But technology remains a very international phenomenon. So in terms of the development of the knowledge for the technology, the manufacturing of different components that go into a piece of equipment, and of course the different location where this equipment gets produced and installed or used. This is all inherently global market, really, and so there will remain a need for international collaboration. Also, I think it's important to mention, when talking about China and international collaboration for decarbonization, is the sort of Belt and Road initiative, where up until a couple of years ago, much of the energy projects in those countries were still fossil fuel projects, largely because China said it's up to the local governments to decide this. We don't have a view on that, but they've really changed tack and said we're going to not do fossil fuel projects under that flagship of the Belt and Road anymore. So that is a big change. But as you said, in Australia, of course, the view on decarbonization, and China in particular, is strongly focused on the resource industry, because a lot of Australian coal and gas goes to China, but also the iron ore. To give you an example of the importance, globally, steel production is responsible for about 8% of carbon emissions. But in China, because China produces so much steel, roughly 60% of the world's total, steel production in China is about 17 or 18% of all this carbon emissions. So it's an outsized sector in China. And to give an idea about the Australia-China link in that steel sector, Australia exports about 70 or 80 billion dollars worth. This is Australian dollars, by the way, of iron ore to Australia. And just that one flow of iron ore exports to China, so one material to one country, is roughly a quarter of the total export value of Australian exports. So it's huge. And in the future, we expect that the steel sector will be decarbonized. And one way that could happen is by using hydrogen rather than coking coal to reduce the iron ore. And the good thing about that is that Australia has iron ore mining and very good renewable energy resources sort of co-located in one spot in the Pilbara region. So there's a potential to use renewable electricity to generate green hydrogen, to reduce the iron ore into pure iron, and then export green iron or even green steel to China. That will require massive investment, and there too there's possibilities for international collaboration. Perhaps difficult to understand how that would occur in the current political environment between China and Australia, because so much of the iron ore would still flow to China. It would make sense that there would also be Chinese investment in those industries. It's not necessarily clear that that is something that will be very easy to accomplish in the current climate. But generally, what we think is that over the next couple of years, as the steel industry and other industries start to decarbonize, they will sort of shift in location towards locations with really very good renewable energy resources. And Australia could be one of them.
Thanks for that. Yeah, we're starting to run out of time, but I think, again, interesting, sort of related to what you said, is that there are a number of big mining companies that are starting to go into collaborations with Chinese steel companies around some of the technologies that will be needed to decarbonize steel, and putting joint investment toward that. So I think that's another interesting example of how some of this collaboration plays out in practice. Want to finish out with a speed round and appreciate if each of our panelists could try and keep their responses to about 60 seconds, which I know is tough on this one. But just to finish out, what is one thing that you would like to see China accomplish in the near term to ensure that it remains on track with its push toward decarbonization? So we'll start, I guess, with Dr. Sun, and go back to Erica and finish out with Jorrit on this.
You like me to give some comments, or you?
Yes, please. That would be great. So, final remarks, about 60 seconds or so, on one thing you'd like to see China accomplish in the near term to ensure it remains on track with decarbonization.
For this one, China's policy, I personally believe that it's a joint effort and joint policy, not from one point, because China's issue is a little bit complicated, because China is a bigger producer and consumer, especially for the coal itself. So I think for the near future, the efforts is how to improve the efficiency and also how to have the control the emission of CO2 by the fossil fuels. Thank you.
Great. So we have efficiency. Over to you, Erica.
My answer is rooted in my current research project, which is looking at the climate disclosures of Chinese companies. And I'll answer by saying that I'd like to see Chinese companies, especially those in high emitting sectors, continue to develop their capacity to measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions, because you can't control what you don't measure.
Thanks for that. And I will mention, related to that there's a big push from the central government to improve overall GHG emissions accounting. So I think that's very much in line with what you just mentioned. Jorrit, let's wrap up with you.
Yeah, so I would refer back to that decarbonization of the steel sector, but also other what they call hard to abate emission intensive industries. I think that what we're seeing right now still is that Chinese decarbonization plans are strongly aimed at renewable electricity, electric vehicles, and sort of the solutions that can be rolled out very quickly, and that's very good. But it is also very important to start to really think about those decarbonization of those harder to abate industries already at this point in time, I think. So some action plans towards that would be really very helpful.
Great, thanks for that. So more detailed plans around hard to abate sectors. So with that, I think we will wrap up today's discussion. So thank you so much to all three of our panelists for your really insightful comments and deep commentary. At this point, I will give it back to James.